Hello friends, welcome back to Aunt Debbie's Boutique. We are going to do block 4 of our sampler quilt that we're making. And I am using Buzzworthy by Canvas. I have 2 layer cakes. I'm not even going to use all of one, but I bought these on sale a while back and I don't have any yardage to go with them. So everything I'm cutting out, I'm having to make do out of a layer cake. I'm also using white Kona cotton solids for the background pieces. In today's quilt though, quilt block, we won't need any background pieces. So it will all be nice and colorful. A few things I want to mention again in case you haven't been tuning in every day. This is geared towards beginners. There will be 12-inch quilt blocks that we make that are just old-timey quilt blocks that have been around forever. And they're pretty basic. Most of them are all made with squares and half square triangles. And I'm trying to limit the number of pieces so it's not overwhelming for beginners. And in the end, we will put them all together in a nice little lap quilt. I recommend that you starch and iron all your fabrics before you use them, and that you iron every step of the way. That will make your block much prettier in the end. And there are a few things that make your quilt block come out better than average. And one is accurate cutting, and the other is accurate stitching. So you want to test your machine to make sure you're getting a good 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I have found, after the suggestion from a viewer, that I do much better with a scant 1/4 inch seam. That's just a hair less than a 1/4 inch. And then my quilt blocks seem to turn out the right size in the end. Otherwise, my 12.5 inch block that I'm supposed to have at the end would be more like 12.25. And so I must be taking a bigger seam allowance than I realize. And I've even used, of course, 1/4 inch foots and all that. But so I'm finding that a scant 1/4 inch works better for me, and it might for you also. Okay, let's get started on today's quilt. What you're going to need is, now, since I'm using layer cakes, I had to cut this in 2 pieces. And I've already lost one of the other pieces. I'll have to get it. I know I cut it. So it probably fell on the floor. I'll find it. But you're going to need a strip that's 2.5 inches wide by 21 inches long. And that 21 gives you a little bit of leeway, extra inch. But since I didn't have anything that long, I am cutting 2 10-inch strips. And you want them contrasting fabrics. Then you're going to need 4.5 inch blocks and a center block. And once again, I'm using this one for the center block, and I fussy cut it so we had the little bees and the whole flower in there. Now this is just a geometric block. It's not a flower block like yesterday's was, but I still like that being the centerpiece. Okay, hold on just a minute while I get my other piece. Yep, it was on the floor just like I thought. Okay, what we're going to do is make a strip unit. That means we're going to fold, again, pretend this is 1 strip unless you're doing what I am and making that out of layer cake, then you'll have to do 2 strips too. And I'm going to take this over to the machine and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam just down one side of this, and I'll bring it back and show you. Okay, I'm using a leader, which is just starting point, just a scrap piece of fabric that I start sewing on before I start chaining pieces. That keeps you from skipping a stitch or two at the beginning when you're starting your sewing, and it also helps from you don't have to do a back stitch, and it helps not having one of those nests on the back of your sewing block where you first start and the bottom thread gets tangled up there. So I like to use a leader. I don't use enders very often, but I do use leaders. Once again, I'm pretending this is one long strip, and I'm going to put the light side down and fold it up and hope my iron is still hot. Yes. And iron that seam towards the darker fabric. Now, on this block, it really doesn't matter which way you iron them. So that's why I iron it towards the dark so it doesn't show through, your seam allowance doesn't. Okay, now we want to cut these up. And I'm going to cut two at a time. I think I'll stagger them. And we want to cut them in 2.5 inch strips. And to know you're getting it straight, well, maybe I better cut them separately just so I can show you this. You want to line up one of your cross lines on your ruler with the seam. And see, this black is a hair more than the yellow, so I'm going to start measuring from the yellow and hope that I have enough fabric here. That's why the strip's better. I've allowed an extra inch. Okay, so I'm lining that up with the seam. I'm coming over 2.5 inches. There we have a 2.5 inch strip. I'm going to repeat that. Now everything should be lined up perfectly on this side. Lining up my seam here. And I should be able to get 4 out of this 10 inches, but I don't have a hair to spare, so that's why it's better if you have a longer strip. Okay. I do have slight hair there. Okay, let's measure this one. Just a sliver extra there. Okay. now we're ready to assemble our block. I'm going to assemble it back on the ironing board here because we're going to be ironing a lot of this. Okay, this is our center block. And then these 4 pieces kind of make a cross right here. And then our corner blocks are going to go like this and like this. Like that and like that. We're going to have our dark piece on the edge close to this. Our light pieces are going to end up on all 4 corners. So put a light piece there on that corner, a light piece on this corner, and then do these the opposite. And that's going to be our block. So the first thing we need to do is sew these together. And you'll notice, because we twisted this around from the way it was cut, our seams are ironed in opposite directions. So you want to nest those together so that the seam is literally sitting on top of the other seam. And it's a good idea to pin it, at least at the intersection there. And we're going to take this over and sew a 1/4 inch seam there. I'm going to do this with all the blocks. Okay, meet me at the sewing machine. Okay, let's cut these apart and then iron them open. And these, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to lay them out first. Let's see. That went there. That there. Like that. And like that. So I'm going to iron them all towards the center. But these seams are not going to line up with any other seams later on, so that's why it doesn't matter. But I like to be consistent so the back doesn't look like a mess. Okay, now we're ready to put all of our blocks together. So, like I've done on other days, I'm going to first sew this 1/4 inch seam. And by the way, I'm using a 2.5 stitch length, which is very small and very tight. So if you have to rip it out, you won't like it. But it keeps your keeps you from having to backstitch, and it keeps your quilt from coming apart later. There's nothing worse to have a beautiful quilt made and then some seam coming apart after it's already been quilted. And I've had that happen, so I learned my lesson. And we want to make sure we square everything up. If it's off ever so slightly, I mean, that's pretty exaggerated, but even just a little bit your whole block, the whole bottom row will be going like this, and it'll be hard to get it to lay flat. So I'm going to take these over in this order, and then I'll add these to each row. Now that we have our rows sewed together, we need to flip this over, leave it all connected like that, and we're going to iron the center away from that center block, and then both of these we're going to iron away from the fore patch, because that's the way it wants to go. You've got thicker seams here. Now I'm going to flip it over and iron it good on the front. And I know that a lot of people finger press until the very end, but I just find that if I'm going to put all this work into making this quilt, I want it to look good when I'm through. So I go to the trouble of ironing every step, most of the time. Now we're going to once again line our rows up, and we have the advantage of that little stitch holding it together from when we chain pieced it, but it can still move ever so slightly. So I'm going to pin my intersections again. Sometimes though, for me, it's easiest just to feel it and to feel whether or not it's nesting together. When it's nesting, if you try to move it closer to each other, it won't move, or at least it won't easily move. But I'm still going to pin this to have a head start on it when I get over there. Okay, I'm going to sew these last two seams with 1/4 inch. Okay, our block is done except for ironing and trimming. So I'm going to press this seam away from the center, and this one too. Try not to mess up any of the other ones. Uh-oh, this did not get caught. I'm gonna have to go back to the machine and fix this. I'll be right back. Okay, got it fixed. Funny thing is, I think I've had a mistake on every single quilt block I have videoed, and yet I make a practice block before I do the video, and I haven't had any problems with any of them, so I'm just jinxed. But just know that it happens to everybody. Okay. Let's see if we are 12.5 inches. Whoa, we are. Okay, to get the center, you're going to line these two seams up, and I'm just going to put a little crease there. Line these two seams up, put a little crease there. You don't want to line these edges. You want to line those seams. Then do it this direction. Okay. Now we have our center. If I can see where I creased it. Okay. I'm going to line my center up on a line here, and I'll line this one down here. Now, it should stick out 1/4 inch on either side, and we're good. We're even going to have just a hair to trim off. Okay, now I'm just going to measure over, I'm going to line this up on a line and measure over 12.5, which means, and I want to make sure I've got these two on a center line also. Okay, now this needs to stick out past this line 1/2 inch, and we're going to have a hair to trim off of this. This is good. Now let's do it in this direction. And there is our nice square block. Okay, let's compare it with the other blocks we've made. We're going to have a very pretty quilt. I just love these colors. I want to show you something else. I told you I make a practice block every time. And I'm doing my practice blocks in a different colorway, so I'm going to have 2 quilts. And here I told you everything went right. I've got a seam here that's not sewn right. Okay, I'll fix that. Why do I not catch these things and off camera? I don't know if you can see all these blocks. You might recognize this fabric. This is what we did all the pot holders in. Can't remember, gingham sundry or something like that. Okay, so we are 4 blocks in. That's 1/3 of the way of our quilt. Here's today's block. So join me tomorrow for block 5. I hope you have enjoyed this. If you have, please like, subscribe, share, whatever you can. It helps me bring more videos, and we will see you tomorrow. Remember, whatever you do, do it to the glory of the Lord.